Hey, how are y'all doing tonight? I've had a big day, just work, usual work, and kind of tired. This is like the third time I've tried to do this thing. Um, I'm a mature woman, we're gonna say, and not very tech savvy, but I just wanted to share uh, one of my family stories that are on the esoteric side. It was kind of proof of existence after death. It has to do with when my father was after he had passed. Um, It was he passed away 8 days after I had my first child. I was living in another state and had had a C-section and was waiting until I was healed to travel, and it was going to be have to be on the weekend because we'd made so many trips in the 3 months that he'd been failing in the hospital that all our vacation time was gone and money too. But anyway, so we Dad passed away, and like I said, and he did get a picture and get to know that his first grandchild had come into the world safe, and that his daughter too had come through it safe. And it was very traumatic. It was probably the most upsetting thing I guess that had ever happened to me up to that point. I was 28 years old, and he was 58. He was 30 years older than me. Um, he was my hero, and I loved him so much. I miss him every day. Uh, and it's been 30, almost 32 years, I guess, since he passed away. Anyway, he was the one I could talk about the esoteric subjects with. He was always very open minded. He was an artist. He actually was a concert trained pianist. He flew jets in the Air Force, and he designed airports internationally at the end of his life. And he lived in Saudi Arabia the last 8 years. Um, Before Saudi Arabia, he worked in Malaysia. He also worked in San Jose, Costa Rica. Well, my father, there was a well-known fact about my father, and he loved breakfast. He liked it for any meal of the day, and he also loved coffee. He would drink it from the time he got up until and take a cup of coffee to bed with him. Um, So after his passing, and just a real quick side note, when he passed away, my closest cousin had come up to the funeral, and she was changing in my room. And she told me this not at the time, but about a year or so later, that while she was changing, she heard my father's voice. She heard him say her name. And I thought that was very interesting in light of the fact that Dad appeared also to my brother's ex-wife, who was his wife at the time, and her lover, and it flipped them out during a dinner party. And that was before he and he and my brother and she divorced. Uh, but this experience was had by my mother, my husband, and myself, independent of each other. And I'll tell you what it was like. I guess it had been about a month after his passing, and I had a new baby, so I was up a lot, taking care of her. But I was waking about the same time every night, and I was smelling bacon and coffee. It was out of place. It had not been cooked. That was a weekend thing for us, and so when I would smell it, I would sit there and I would think about my father, and get a little bit. I was still sad. I was still dealing with it, and but it was kind of comforting. And I thought, you must be just this must be like a hallucination of some sort. I didn't really understand it, what was going on. And after about 5 days of this happening, one time I accidentally woke my husband up when I woke up. And I was very careful about how I asked him the question. I didn't want it to be a leading question. I didn't want to say, "Are you smelling this?" I said, "Have you smelled anything unusual lately?" And he said, "Funny you ask." He said, "The other day I smelled sausage and coffee." And I said, "Hmm." So then I told him what had been happening with me for the past 5 nights. And now I said bacon and coffee, but it doesn't matter. It was basically breakfast foods. Well, days pass, and we didn't really discuss it anymore, but we're sitting at the dining table, and my mother was slow to get up as usual, and it was the weekend. And she woke up, she was straggling in. She said, "Hey, Don, I woke up this morning. It was still dark outside, and I smelled bacon and coffee." And I thought, wow, you're up awful early fixing us breakfast. And I got in there, and she said there was no breakfast. There was no bacon, no coffee, no whatever. And so all three of us, I mean, Don and I, my husband and I, just our mouths just fell open, because here I had the experience, he had the experience, and she had the experience. And to me, that was confirmation of life after death. One of my favorite books I read a long time ago, after my father passed, and I didn't have somebody to talk to. My mother was, while she was actually very psychic and intuitive, she would not have put it in those terms. She was very pragmatic, and while she was loving, she was not very affectionate. So I sought answers, after Dad's passing. I wanted to know more than just the biblical references that you got about when somebody passes. And so I read this book called Life After Life, or Life After Death, by Raymond Moody. He was a professor at West Georgia College for many years and taught what do they call that? Oh, I can't remember. Anyway, it's uh, the science, the esoteric sciences, basically. But anyway, he did a lot of interesting stories about people who had died and come back to tell their story or their version of what they saw or what they experienced, and I found that very helpful. I also did a lot of reading of Edgar Cayce and also known as the Sleeping Prophet, and I found that very helpful. Just wondering if all of you have some similar stories about when your loved ones passed away and the confirmation of of life after death. I have another story, real quick, if I have time to tell it. It involves an uncle in town. He's now deceased, but he and they were local, and they were my husband's aunt and uncle, and they had a son who died at 16, and they also had two other sons. Well, they're very simple country folk, very church oriented, religious oriented, and a close family. And the youngest son passed away. As I was told the story firsthand, from the uncle, their church was just down the street, and the funeral had ended, and he was rushing home to open up the house, because it is a tradition in the South here for everybody to bring food and to join and have fellowship, and you know help support the family a little bit. And anyway, so he was rushing home from church to get the house open, because he had anticipated this, and the phone was ringing. So he was really rushing to get the key in the door and get it open. And he got to the phone, quickly, and answered. And he said, "Hello." And on the other line, he said, "Hey, Dad." And he said, "Hey." He said, "How?" And the person said, "How you doing?" He said, "Not so good." And as he talked to him, people were pouring in from the funeral that had been at the funeral and at the graveside service, and they were bringing their pies and cakes and filling in. And his two living sons had walked in the kitchen also, and he realized he was on the phone with his deceased son, having a conversation. And he said, "I'll be seeing you," and he hung up. The son did, and it disturbed him so much. I think he said it was 2 or 3 years before he actually told his own wife that he had this conversation after the funeral with his deceased son, their deceased son. So anyway, I have lots and lots of stories. I hope I can garnish some interest, and I'd really love to hear your stories. And if I find them interesting and time allows, I will share them if you say that it's okay. Anyway, I, in closing, I think I just want to mention one more thing. Some of my family members don't have experience, unusual experience. I'll say extrasensory perceptions, they're not very intuitive. I don't know why some people do have a lot of connection. I think we're born with it. I mean, I think everybody's born with it. And it's a matter of your belief system. And I think it's like piano. I think anybody can learn to play the piano. There's going to be some people that are, Mozarts that are just phenomenal at it, and some that are just, average. But I think everybody has psychic intuition. They have healing capabilities. But you have to work like anything. You have to work at it. It's not just, you know, generally it's just not going to happen like a miracle type thing. It's something you work at. And also, I think a lot of people are fearful when they have an experience, whether they hear a spirit, see a spirit,